The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Kensington Palace as Catherine, the Princess of Wales, sat quietly in her private study. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the official letter that had arrived just an hour earlier. The royal seal at the top seemed to blur as tears formed in her eyes. She had read the contents 3 times, but the words still felt impossible to believe. Prince William was in his office down the hallway, completely unaware of what his wife had just discovered. He was reviewing his schedule for the upcoming week, which included several public appearances and a charity visit to a children's hospital. The sound of his pen scratching against paper was the only noise in the room until he heard soft footsteps approaching his door. Catherine appeared in the doorway, her face pale and her usual bright smile nowhere to be seen. William immediately noticed something was wrong. After 15 years together, he could read her expressions like an open book. The way she clutched the letter to her chest and the slight shake in her voice when she whispered his name told him this was serious. "What is it, darling?" William asked, setting down his pen and giving her his full attention. He had learned from his father's mistakes and always made time for the people he loved, especially when they clearly needed him. Catherine walked slowly into the room, each step feeling heavy. She had been preparing herself for this conversation during the walk from her study, but now that the moment had arrived, she struggled to find the right words. How do you tell someone you love that everything they thought they knew about their family might be wrong? "I received a letter this morning," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's from a solicitor's office in Edinburgh. They represent someone who claims to have information about your mother's final days." William's face changed instantly. Any mention of Princess Diana still affected him deeply, even after all these years. He had worked hard with therapists to process his grief and anger, but certain topics could still catch him off guard. The idea that new information about his mother might exist was both thrilling and terrifying. The letter explained that a former staff member at the hospital where Diana was treated had come forward with documents and personal items that had never been made public. This person had kept these materials secret for over 25 years, waiting for what they felt was the right time to share them with her sons. Catherine sat down across from her husband, watching as he processed this information. She knew how much he had struggled with unanswered questions about that terrible night in Paris. Despite all the investigations and reports, William had always felt like important pieces of the story were missing. "What kind of information?" William asked, his voice tight with emotion. He was trying to stay calm, but Catherine could see the conflict in his eyes. Part of him desperately wanted to know everything, while another part was afraid of what he might learn. The solicitor's letter was carefully worded, but it hinted at personal messages and items that Diana had specifically requested be given to her sons when they were older and better able to handle the emotional weight. There were also witness accounts from medical staff who had been present during her final hours. Catherine reached across the desk and took her husband's hand. She could feel how cold his fingers were, and she knew he was fighting to maintain his composure. This was exactly the kind of moment that could either bring them closer together or create distance if they didn't handle it carefully. "We don't have to do anything right now," she said gently. "We can take time to think about whether we want to pursue this or not. There's no pressure to make a decision today." But even as she said the words, Catherine knew that William's curiosity would eventually win out. He had spent his entire adult life trying to honor his mother's memory, while also protecting himself and his family from the intense media scrutiny that surrounded anything connected to Diana. The morning that had started so normally had suddenly become one of the most significant days in their marriage. Neither of them could have predicted that a simple letter would force them to confront emotions and memories they had worked so hard to manage. William stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens where his children often played. He thought about how Diana would never get to meet her grandchildren, and how much she would have loved watching them grow up. The possibility of having new connection to her was almost overwhelming. "I need to call Harry," he said finally, turning back to face Catherine. "Whatever we decide, we need to decide together." The phone call with Prince Harry was more difficult than William had expected. Despite their recent struggles and the distance that had grown between them since Harry's move to America, This news brought back all the complex emotions they had, shared as young boys grieving their mother. Harry's voice cracked when William explained about the letter, and for a moment, they sounded like the close brothers they used to be. "I need to see whatever this is," Harry said immediately, his protective instincts kicking in just as they had when he was 12 years old walking behind Diana's coffin. "When can we meet?" Catherine listened from across the room as William explained the details to his brother. She could see the tension building in her husband's shoulders as they discussed logistics and timing. The media attention that would inevitably follow any meeting between the brothers was already weighing on both their minds. They agreed to meet in London within the week, before any decisions were made about contacting the solicitor. Catherine suggested they meet at their private residence rather than any official royal location, hoping to keep things as personal and intimate as possible. This wasn't about their public roles or royal duties. This was about two sons trying to understand their mother's final moments. After ending the call, William sat in silence for several minutes. Catherine didn't push him to talk, knowing he needed time to process everything. She had learned during their marriage that her husband dealt with emotional stress by thinking through every possible outcome before making decisions. It was both a strength and sometimes a burden for him. "What if the information is something we're not prepared to hear?" William finally asked. "What if it changes how we remember her?" These were the questions that had been haunting him since reading the letter. Diana's public image was so carefully constructed and protected that any new revelations could potentially alter not just his personal memories, but also how the world viewed his mother. The responsibility of being her son meant that his decisions affected not just his family, but also her legacy. Catherine moved to sit beside him on the small sofa near the window. "Your memories of your mother are yours," she said softly. "No letter or document can change the love she had for you and Harry, or the person she was when she was with you." She was trying to be supportive while also being realistic about what they might face. As someone who had married into the royal family, Catherine understood the unique challenges of having every personal moment scrutinized by the public. She also knew how important it was for William to feel like he had some control over his mother's story. The next few days were filled with careful planning and secret arrangements. They couldn't risk word getting out to the media before they had decided what to do. Catherine coordinated with their security team, while William worked with his private secretary to clear his schedule for the potential meeting with Harry. During this time, their 3 children noticed the tension in the house even though both parents tried to maintain normal routines. Prince George, being the oldest, was the most perceptive and asked his mother directly if something was wrong. Catherine struggled with how much to explain, wanting to be honest without burdening him with adult concerns. "Sometimes grown-ups receive news that makes them think about people they miss," she told George carefully. "Daddy is thinking about Granny Diana, whom he loved very much but who died before you were born." George nodded solemnly, understanding more than many children his age would. Growing up in the royal family meant learning early that some topics were more serious than others, and that his father carried special responsibilities and sorrows that other fathers didn't have. Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis were too young to fully understand what was happening, but they picked up on the emotional atmosphere. They became more clingy with both parents, sensing that something important was occurring even if they couldn't name what it was. Catherine found herself thinking about Diana more during these days than she had in years. She wondered what advice her mother-in-law might have given about handling such a delicate situation. Diana had always prioritized her son's well-being above everything else, and Catherine tried to channel that same protective instinct as she supported William through this difficult time. The weight of keeping such a significant secret was exhausting for both of them. They couldn't discuss it with their usual trusted advisors without risking leaks, so they were navigating the situation entirely on their own. Catherine often found herself lying awake at night, wondering if they were making the right choices and what the long-term consequences might be. As the day of Harry's arrival approached, both William and Catherine felt the tension building. This meeting would determine not just whether they pursued the information about Diana, but also whether the brothers could find a way back to some form of relationship despite everything that had happened between them in recent years. The day Harry arrived in London, the atmosphere at Kensington Palace was thick with nervous energy. Catherine had spent the morning preparing a private lunch, hoping that familiar foods might help ease some of the awkwardness between the brothers. She remembered how they used to enjoy simple meals together during happier times, and she wanted to recreate some of that comfort. William paced in his study, checking his watch repeatedly. He hadn't seen Harry in person for over 6 months, and their last meeting had ended with harsh words and hurt feelings. Now they were about to discuss the most sensitive topic possible, their mother's death and potential new information about her final hours. When Harry's car finally pulled up to the private entrance, Catherine watched from an upstairs window as he stepped out. He looked older, more serious than she remembered, and she could see the weight of their family's recent troubles in the way he carried himself. Despite everything that had happened between them, her heart ached seeing him like this. The first few minutes of the reunion were painfully polite. Harry hugged Catherine warmly, but his greeting with William was stiff and formal. They made small talk about the weather and Harry's flight, carefully avoiding any mention of the tensions that had driven them apart. Catherine could see both men struggling with how to bridge the gap that had grown between them. "Perhaps we should sit down and discuss why we're here," William finally said, leading them to the comfortable sitting room where Catherine had arranged tea and sandwiches. The familiar ritual of afternoon tea seemed to help both brothers relax slightly, reminding them of countless similar moments from their childhood. Harry pulled out his own copy of the solicitor's letter, which had been sent to him as well. Seeing both documents side by side made the situation feel more real and more serious. This wasn't just about William's curiosity or emotional needs, it was about both of them as Diana's sons. "I've been thinking about this constantly since you called," Harry admitted, his voice quieter than usual. "Part of me is desperate to know what this person has to say, but part of me is terrified that it will somehow make losing her hurt all over again." Catherine saw William's expression soften as he heard the vulnerability in his brother's voice. Despite all their recent conflicts, they shared this fundamental experience of losing their mother at a young age. And that bond was still powerful, enough to cut through other disagreements. They spent the next hour discussing their fears and hopes about what the new information might contain. Harry worried that it could include details about Diana's state of mind that might be difficult to hear. William was concerned about how any revelations might affect their children's understanding of their grandmother's story. "What if she left? Messages specifically for us?" Harry asked. "What if there are things she wanted to tell us that we never got to hear?" This possibility was both the most hopeful and most heartbreaking aspect of the situation. Both brothers had spent years wondering what Diana would have said to them as they grew up, got married, and had children of their own. The chance to hear her voice again, even in written form, was almost too precious to resist. Catherine listened carefully as they talked, offering gentle input when appropriate, but mostly letting them work through their emotions together. She could see that this conversation was healing something between them that had been broken for months. Their shared love for Diana was stronger than their recent disagreements. As the afternoon wore on, they began to discuss practical considerations. If they decided to meet with the solicitor, they would need to coordinate their schedules and security arrangements. They would also need to prepare themselves emotionally for whatever they might learn. "I think we have to do this," William said, finally. "I can't spend the rest of my life wondering what we might have missed, but I want us to do it together, as brothers." Harry nodded, reaching across to squeeze his brother's shoulder in the first truly warm gesture between them since he had arrived. "Together," he agreed. "Just like we should have been doing all along." Catherine felt tears forming in her eyes as she watched this moment of reconciliation. She knew that this decision would change their lives in ways they couldn't predict, but she also knew that facing it together was the right choice. Diana would have wanted her sons to support each other through this difficult journey. The decision was made, but none of them fully understood what they were about to discover. As they prepared to contact the solicitor's office, each of them carried their own hopes and fears about what Diana's final gift to her sons might reveal. The room fell quiet as they contemplated the magnitude of what they were about to undertake. knowing that once they opened this door, there would be no going back. The meeting with the solicitor was arranged for the following week in a private office building in central London. Catherine insisted on accompanying William, knowing that he would need her support regardless of what they discovered. Harry flew back from California specifically for this meeting, understanding that this was too important to handle alone. The solicitor, Mrs. Margaret Thompson, was a woman in her 70s who had been practicing law for over 40 years. She had been chosen by her client specifically because of her reputation for discretion and her experience handling sensitive royal matters. When the three of them arrived at her office, she greeted them with professional warmth but also visible emotion. "I want you to know," Mrs. Thompson began, "that my client struggled for years about whether to come forward with this information. They felt a tremendous responsibility to honor Princess Diana's wishes while also respecting your privacy and healing process." She explained that her client had been a senior nurse at the hospital in Paris where Diana was treated. This person had been present during Diana's final conscious moments and had received specific instructions from her about items and messages that were to be delivered to her sons when they were adults. "Your mother was very clear that these were not to be shared while you were still grieving children," Mrs. Thompson continued. "She wanted you to be emotionally mature enough to handle what she had to say." Catherine watched William's face carefully as Mrs. Thompson spoke. She could see him fighting to maintain his composure, but his hands were shaking slightly and she knew he was struggling with the magnitude of what they were about to learn. The first item Mrs. Thompson presented was a sealed envelope addressed to both sons in Diana's handwriting. The sight of their mother's distinctive script was almost overwhelming for both brothers. Harry reached for William's hand instinctively, and Catherine was moved by this simple gesture of mutual support. She wrote this during her final hour of consciousness. Mrs. Thompson explained gently. The medical staff gave her paper and pen. When she asked for them, she was very determined to get these words down, even though she was in considerable pain. Neither brother was ready to open the letter immediately. The weight of holding their mother's final written words was almost too much to bear. Catherine suggested they take a moment to process before continuing, and Mrs. Thompson kindly offered them privacy. While they sat in silence, Catherine found herself thinking about how surreal this moment was. Just a week ago, they had been living their normal lives, and now they were holding what might be Diana's last communication to her beloved sons. The responsibility of supporting both men through this experience felt enormous. The second item was a small jewelry box containing Diana's personal cross necklace and her mother's engagement ring, which she had worn on a chain around her neck. These items had somehow been overlooked in the official inventory of her personal effects, and the nurse had kept them safe for over 2 decades. "She specifically asked that these be given to your wives someday," Mrs. Thompson explained, looking at Catherine with gentle eyes. She said she wanted the women who would love and care for her sons to have something that connected them to her. Catherine felt her breath catch in her throat as she looked at the delicate jewelry. The idea that Diana had been thinking about future daughters-in-law during her final moments was both beautiful and heartbreaking. She could imagine Diana's maternal instincts taking over even in her darkest hour, wanting to leave something meaningful for the women who would join her family. The third and most surprising item was a small recording device. Mrs. Thompson explained that Diana had managed to record a brief message for each son individually, though the circumstances and her condition made the recordings difficult to understand in places. The medical staff were amazed by her determination to complete these tasks, Mrs. Thompson said. Even in tremendous pain, she was focused entirely on making sure you both knew how much she loved you and how proud she was of the men she knew you would become. William finally found his voice. "How do we know this is real?" he asked, not because he doubted the authenticity, but because the situation felt almost too meaningful to be true. Mrs. Thompson provided documentation from the hospital, witness statements from medical staff, and other verification that proved the legitimacy of everything she was presenting. The thoroughness of the evidence made it clear that this was indeed genuine, and that Diana had somehow found the strength to think of her sons' futures even as her own life was ending. As they prepared to leave the office with these precious items, Catherine realized that their lives had just changed forever. They now had pieces of Diana that no one else in the world had ever seen or heard, final messages from a mother to her children that had waited 25 years to be delivered. The car ride back to Kensington Palace was silent, each of them lost in their own thoughts about what they had just experienced and what they would discover when they finally opened Diana's letter and listened to her recordings. Back at Kensington Palace, the three of them sat in William's private study with Diana's letter, the jewelry, and the recording device arranged carefully on the desk between them. None of them had spoken during the drive home, each lost in their own thoughts about what they were about to experience. Catherine suggested they start with the letter, feeling that Diana's written words might prepare them for the emotional impact of hearing her voice. William's hands trembled as he carefully opened the envelope, being extra cautious not to damage what might be the last thing his mother had ever written. The letter was written on hospital stationery in Diana's familiar handwriting, though it was shakier than usual due to her condition and injuries. As William unfolded the pages, both brothers leaned forward, desperate to catch every word their mother had left for them. "My darling boys," the letter began, and immediately both William and Harry felt tears forming in their eyes. "If you are reading this, then I am no longer with you, but please know that my love for you both will never end, not even in death." Catherine watched as the brothers read together, seeing the profound effect that their mother's words were having on them. Diana had written about her hopes for their futures, her pride in the young men they were becoming, and her dreams of the families they would someday create. "William, my serious and thoughtful son," one section read, "you carry such weight on your shoulders, but remember that being strong doesn't mean you can't ask for help. Find someone who makes you laugh and holds your hand when the world feels too heavy. Love deeply, and let yourself be loved in return." The passage about Harry was equally touching. "My darling Harry, your spirit and joy light up every room you enter. Don't let the world make you afraid to be different or to follow your heart. Your sensitivity is a gift, not a weakness. Use it to help others and to build bridges between people." But it was the final section that broke down all their remaining defenses. Diana had somehow found the strength to write about her grandchildren, whom she would never meet. "I know you will both be wonderful fathers," she wrote. "When you hold your children for the first time, kiss them once for me. Tell them about their grandmother, who would have loved them beyond measure." By the time they finished reading the letter, all three of them were crying openly. Catherine had never seen William so emotionally overwhelmed, and her heart ached for both brothers as they processed their mother's final words to them. "She knew," Harry whispered through his tears. "Somehow she knew exactly what we needed to hear." They sat in silence for several minutes, allowing themselves to fully experience the gift Diana had given them. Her words had somehow bridged the 25 years since her death, making her feel present in the room with them. When they finally felt ready, William picked up the small recording device with shaking hands. Mrs. Thompson had explained that there were 2 short messages, one for each son, recorded in Diana's private moments during her final hour of consciousness. William's message came first. Despite the poor audio quality and Diana's obvious pain, her love came through clearly in every word. She spoke about being proud of the man he was becoming, about trusting him to take care of Harry, and about her hope that he would find happiness and love in his life. "Remember to smile, my darling," her voice said softly through the static. "You have your grandfather's serious nature, but you also have my heart. Don't be afraid to show it to the world." Harry's message was equally profound, but different in tone, acknowledging his more rebellious nature while encouraging him to use his passion for good. Diana spoke about understanding his need to find his own path, and assured him that being different didn't mean being wrong. "You are going to help so many people, Harry," her weak but determined voice told him. "Your heart is so big, and the world needs that kind of love. Don't let anyone make you smaller than you are." The final moments of both recordings contained Diana's voice singing softly, a lullaby she used to sing to them when they were small children. The melody was barely audible, but both brothers remembered it perfectly and found themselves humming along through their tears. As the last notes faded, Catherine reached out to take both men's hands. The three of them sat connected in their grief and love, processing the magnitude of what they had just experienced together. "She's still taking care of us," William said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "Even now, she's still being our mother." Catherine knew that this moment would change all of their lives forever. Diana's final gift to her sons wasn't just information about her last hours, it was reassurance, guidance, and most importantly, the confirmation that her love for them had transcended death itself. In the weeks that followed their emotional discovery, William and Catherine found themselves changed by Diana's final messages. The weight of carrying such precious and private memories was both a blessing and a responsibility that affected every aspect of their daily lives. Catherine often caught William staring thoughtfully out windows or pausing in the middle of conversations, and she knew he was processing his mother's words. Diana's encouragement about finding someone who made him laugh and held his hand when the world felt heavy had given him a new appreciation for their marriage and partnership. "She would have loved you," William told Catherine one evening as they walked through their private garden. "The way she wrote about hoping I would find love, she was describing exactly what you've given me." Catherine had been deeply moved by Diana's request that her jewelry be given to her sons' wives. Wearing Diana's cross necklace made her feel connected to a woman she had never met, but who had shaped the man she loved. The weight of the necklace was a constant reminder of the legacy she was now part of preserving. The children noticed changes, in their father too, though they were too young to understand the source. William seemed more present during their time together, more willing to be silly and playful. Diana's reminder to smile and show his heart to the world had given him permission to be less guarded, even in his role as future king. Harry had stayed in London longer than planned, and the brothers spent hours talking about their memories of their mother and how her final messages had affected them. The reconciliation that had begun with the discovery of the letter continued to grow stronger as they processed their shared experience. "I keep thinking about what she said about helping people and not letting anyone make me smaller," Harry confided to Catherine during one of their private conversations. "I've been so angry for so long, but hearing her voice again reminded me who I'm supposed to be." The decision about whether to share their discovery with the public was one they wrestled with for weeks. Diana's messages were deeply personal, but they also contained wisdom and love that might comfort other people who had experienced loss. Ultimately, they decided to keep the recordings and most of the letter private, but to share the story of receiving them. Catherine helped William craft a statement that honored both Diana's memory and their need for privacy. They explained that they had received personal messages from their mother that had provided them with comfort and closure, and they asked for respect regarding the private nature of these communications. The public response was overwhelmingly positive. People around the world were moved by the idea that Diana had somehow found a way to continue caring for her sons even after death. Many shared their own stories of final messages from loved ones, creating a global conversation about love, loss, and the connections that transcend death. For Catherine, watching her husband heal from receiving his mother's final words was one of the most profound experiences of their marriage. She saw him become more open about his emotions, more willing to discuss Diana with their children, and more committed to honoring her memory through his public work. The jewelry box that Diana had left became a treasured part of their family's private collection. Catherine wore the cross necklace on special occasions, and they planned to share the story of its significance with their children when they were old enough to understand. Prince George had asked his father directly why he seemed happier lately, with the perceptive nature that often surprised adults. William had simply told him that he had received a special message from Granny Diana that reminded him how important it was to enjoy every moment with the people he loved. As months passed, the intense emotion of that initial discovery settled into a quiet sense of peace. Diana's words had given both her sons what they needed most: reassurance that they were loved, guidance for their futures, and the knowledge that their mother's final thoughts had been of them. Catherine often reflected on how remarkable it was that a woman facing her own death had found the strength to think so clearly about her son's emotional needs. Diana's final gift wasn't just the messages themselves, but the healing and reconciliation they had brought to her family. The heart-stopping moment when they first read Diana's letter had given way to lasting comfort and connection. Her words continued to guide them through difficult decisions and remind them of what truly mattered in their lives. Standing together in their garden one evening, watching their children play while the sun set behind them, William and Catherine felt Diana's presence in their happiness. Her final messages had not only brought closure to painful questions about her death, but had also strengthened their commitment to building the loving family she had dreamed they would create. The tears they had shed together that emotional day had washed away years of unanswered questions and replaced them with the certainty that love truly does transcend death, and that a mother's guidance can continue to shape her children's lives long after she is gone.